America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation.
And I'm Toni Angelini, Senior Vice President of Advocacy and Operations for Job Creators Network.
Please subscribe to the show at SalemPodcastNetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts from. Today, we are joined by Jeff Knight. Jeff is the founder and CEO of FileTax.net, and he joins us today to talk about something called the Beneficial Ownership Information Report. And if you are a small business owner listening to us right now and you don't know about this law, you are in good company because a lot of small business owners do not know about it. But we're happy to have Jeff here to talk about this because non-compliance for all of our small business owners, and I mean small business owners, could actually mean jail time and fines. So Jeff, thanks so much for joining us. Talk to us about this Corporate Transparency Act, which in there is this reporting requirement for small business owners. Tell us about that.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It is, as we were just talking briefly before the show, it's kind of a hefty deal, right? So some big names behind this, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which just the name alone can make people shiver a bit. And now it's for business owners to wake up and discover on January 1st of this year, they have to comply with this new documentation, which they never before had to do, is scary. We're past Halloween, but it's still a scary topic because, like you said, some of the fines and consequences that go along with it are very significant. $591 a day, capping out at $10,000, and also the potential for up to 2 years in jail time if you are determined to not willfully comply. So, as we know, attorneys can kind of interpret things a lot of different ways, and who's to say what willful compliance really means. But at the end of the day, it's very small business owners that are affected. The way they've constructed the law, it's $5 million of revenue or below, 20 employees or below. For the most part, these are the companies that are not exempt. And the folks who are exempt are big businesses, publicly traded companies, insurance companies, bank companies. And it's put a lot of people in disarray. And then also, just unknown. I tend to associate with a lot of business owners myself. I'm definitely all about small business, 25 plus year entrepreneur. We've been in business for 19 years with our tax and compliance software. And the people I associate with, if I meet a new business owner, it's one of the first questions that I ask. About 50% of the time, they've never heard of it, which is concerning. Because I'm not talking about, these are pretty sophisticated people with large operations. It's not somebody operating out of their garage. Not like there's anything against that because we all started there. I started on a kitchen table. But the awareness just isn't there. And it just doesn't seem right to have that level of penalty that you could potentially be met with when the word has not been adequately spread out.
You mentioned that anecdotally you ask clients and new clients, have you heard of this? Have you heard of this? And you're at 50%. So we do a national poll of small business owners, and our polling shows only 30% have heard of it. So I have even worse news for you. Yeah. Devastating. So how do small business owners file this paperwork? What kind of information are they trying to get from small business owners? And why is it, because the pushback I have been hearing from folks I know on the Hill and small business owners is that, number one, there's a lot of personal information that they've got to turn over. There are time deadlines that if they miss them, they're suddenly in non-compliance. And it's not like an annual thing. It's a continuous, if you've got turnover or somebody leaves or comes on board, there's all kinds of deadlines. And walk us through some of that.
Yeah, it's also things like if your driver's license expires or your passport expires, and they will expire, suddenly you're going to be out of compliance if you move. So a couple questions in there to unpack, but yeah, at the core, what you need to provide, it's not too dissimilar than the information that you provided when you opened your bank account. So it's your driver's license or passport, your EIN, your SSN, your addresses. They define whoever a beneficial owner is in a couple different ways. The main way is if you own 25% or more of the entity, or if you can make meaningful decisions, like can you open a bank account? Can you answer key contracts for a particular vendor or something that you'll be determined to be a beneficial owner. So perhaps a bit of subjectivity in there, but regardless, all those folks who are deemed to be beneficial owners in a reporting company, which meets the criteria that we mentioned before, usually less than 5 million in revenue, less than 20 employees, they are obligated now to file this, and to file it fast. There's different buckets. So if you created your company prior to January 1st of this year, you've been given a pass this entire year to somehow magically learn about it. I know that's what we were talking about before, but I meant to add that FinCEN has, I think, like 30,000 people following them on LinkedIn. And there's maybe 32 million people who need to actually file. So there's
tell our audience who FinCEN is.
Yeah, FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. So that's the group who's behind this. It's part of the Department of Treasury, and that's really who you're submitting this data to. They're holding a repository of the personal information, the SSNs, the EINs that I mentioned previously. So on one hand, you could say it's not a big ask because the information you're providing shouldn't be arduous, but all it takes is a partner to change an address, to forget you to renew your passport, and suddenly you're not compliant and potentially subject to these penalties.
You can color me in the 30%, or I'm sorry, the 70% of small business owners who didn't know about this. In addition to my work at Job Creators Network, I own 3 technically small businesses, and none of our businesses have been notified. And when we first started talking about this at Job Creators Network, I called our accountant and I asked him if he, what did he know about it? And the answer was not much. So, you kind of referenced earlier that there has not been much outreach done. I'm curious, have you seen it anywhere, advertised? Has the federal government put any dollars behind reaching out to small business owners so that they can comply?
I've seen some webinars. I can't tell you how effective they are. I mean, there was one webinar that I saw that was on LinkedIn. It wasn't necessarily well attended. In my experience, this is really where I say private business typically steps in. If there's a need that has been created, didn't previously exist, now must be adhered to. And that's frankly the role that we filled, because we created a software that allows people to prepare and submit these easily. We are spending money to notify the public and to announce our brand so they know that it's a solution that exists. But there's also an education piece. So it's one thing, because we're also in the tax business. April 15th is a date that's ingrained in everybody's head. You know what you have to do on April 15th. It's just kind of part of who we are. But this is new. So how do you know you have to file if you don't know what it even is in the first place? So kind of a multi-layered process that we are spending a lot of time with those educational pieces to inform. So I have seen attempts. I just don't think that they've been that successful. I don't think it's a bold statement to say that the government is not necessarily known for efficiency and effective communication. And in this particular issue, that's ringing true as well. So I think it's somewhat incumbent upon small business owners to take care of small business owners and get the word out. And that's the camp that we fall in.
So back to your software that you have and the private sector sort of filling the vacuum that the federal government, always seems to be good at creating. We saw through the Earned Income Tax Credit, PPP, we saw some organizations that were more scrupulous than others. And it created a lot of confusion for small business owners in terms of who to use to file, who could actually like assist them and who was just trying to rip them off, quite frankly. How do you set yourselves apart so that people understand that you know what you're doing, and B, that you are here to help?
I suppose part of it is the awareness, and that we stand behind the company. We've been in business, as I mentioned, for approaching 20 years and have an A+ rating with a BBB. We have helped over 2 million customers over the years. And the security is really what's most important, is to make sure that you have like DoD level servers to transmit information, to be able to delete the information if it's requested of the customer, and to rely on a reputation, because ultimately that is what we have. And thankfully, it's been a good run as a result of doing that. But you do bring up a good point, because I've definitely seen some unscrupulous characters standing up different types of marketing material, which just doesn't smell right to me. But I'm kind of in this world, and there's a lot of people you're a harried business owner. You're trying to take care of your clients and your family and everything else. And this is some new thing that you just heard about, and suddenly you're presented with an opportunity to go file it. It kind of creates an opportunity where people could be taken advantage of. So I would say it's super important to make sure that wherever you do it, it's high level SSL encryption, that you should ask about their security protocols and procedures with regard to how they handle your data. Do they expunge the data if requested to? What's their reputation? Definitely do your homework. Or you could go direct to FinCEN. I mean, FinCEN obviously has a mechanism to submit direct to them as well. The support level with the government is not what you would expect in the private sector for something that's so important. So ultimately, that's a personal decision. But for anything where you're providing this level of PII, I would advise you to do your due diligence.
Jeff, there's a lot of, you mentioned personal information that business owners have to hand over about themselves. And obviously anyone who has any kind of interest in the business, or 25% interest, from birthdays, addresses, like you said, photocopies of passports, updating all of that information on a regular basis. Not to be a conspiracy theorist, but it's a lot of private information that you've got to turn over to the government that, we currently don't have to do that. I mean, is it crazy to think that could be weaponized against you as a citizen? And I only say that because we've seen it happen in the past against, conservative organizations, or like the Tea Party, for example, dealt with that with the IRS, years ago. So we have seen different agencies weaponized in that way. And is that something that you think, based on your experience, anyone should be concerned about?
I think everybody should be concerned about your data. It's the world we're in, for sure. And unfortunately, just because it's in a repository with the government doesn't necessarily make it any safer. So I feel like myself, again, as a small business owner, and everybody else who's a small business owner who has to comply with this, you're a bit between a rock and a hard place, where everything you said are valid concerns and you need to be aware of it. But at the same time, not complying puts you in a situation where you could be subject for hefty penalties and potentially, however willful noncompliance is defined, jail time. So it's not messing around with that type of thing. Historically, I would say that America was, I suppose, last to the party in terms of adopting these types of protocols and procedures. We were given a lot of pressure from many governing bodies throughout the world who have similar repositories. And perhaps it's almost 10 years ago, the Panama Papers, which was in 2016, which might have served as the genesis for pushing this higher on the agenda, where there were so many corporations that were found to be created through this law firm in Panama. And they were designed to hide the beneficial owners. That was the express reason. And on one hand, there's a lot of legitimate reasons why you might want to do that, but they also exposed some illegitimate reasons. There was the Prime Minister of the UK, who was exposed as being involved in some entities. The Prime Minister of Iceland was relieved of his duties because of a similar situation. And then there was also some illicit actors that they found. And we're talking about things like money laundering and tax evasion and things of that nature. So that put the pressure on the US more because we didn't have that singular repository to go to. So no matter how strongly you feel or like the general you about providing this level of information to the government, it's just one of those things you have to weigh with national security. And is there a benefit here? Could they potentially use this for some other purpose? We certainly hope not. But I would be naive to say that it's not possible.
Why just small business owners? I mean, money laundering and those nefarious things happen in larger companies. Why the $5 million cutoff? I mean, maybe this goes beyond your scope of knowledge because I'm getting into sort of the crime factor, but
Yeah.
Money laundering can happen, in large companies too, and banks and embezzlements and all of those things.
Yeah.
Why target the smallest of the small businesses? We're talking 21 employees, right? 21 employees and $5 million in revenues. It's not a big company.
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. It was honestly my first reaction when I heard about this. It didn't necessarily add up. Part of the explanation that made sense to me was if you think about banks and insurance companies and just financially regulated companies that already had to disclose that type of information in order to conduct business in the line of business that they're in, that the data was already known, so to speak. So there's that. I think it just pits the small dry cleaner, the local, contractor in this bucket where the types of vehicles that have historically been used for this type of thing, they don't need a lot of beneficial owners. They don't need employees. And oftentimes it's an LLC that owns another LLC that is involved with an S Corp, and it gets fairly complicated. So what I've been told is that profile is the profile where the bad actors were hanging out. It just happens to encompass mom and pop, Main Street USA as well, and creates an additional burden.
It's interesting over the course of many years. It's just starts to feel like the smallest. COVID was really the thing for me that highlighted that the smallest, most vulnerable businesses. At the end of the day, we're always going to be sort of the ones that we're taking the most advantage of. Some of it I think is big government, and some of it is just logistics, and they're just more vulnerable. But this is just another example of mom and pop, the people that are sponsoring your kids' little league team are now also having to deal with a lot of this. I'm in New Jersey, so. Here we're used to onerous red tape, but it'll be curious down the line to see if in some states that aren't as, heavily regulated, how this impacts them. You may not know the answer to this, and I haven't seen it anywhere, but is this something that can be, is the deadline, is there any hope of extending it so that more people can be informed about it? Or is this something that when the administration changes, if there's a new administration that's more friendly to small businesses, is this something that may be eliminated altogether?
I mean, I have heard whisperings that yes, there's certainly a strong contingent that is pushing for that, or at least for it to be restructured in such a way where it might look a little different. And I can't tell you really what that means. I think you guys are aware of a lot of states where there's folks battling and suing the government about this. Northern District of Alabama is probably the one of note in that they are successful as of right now. At least the small business group that sued the government currently has a stay, not required to submit, although we know that that's going to be fought. And I doubt it will stick, but there are some other states following suit. There was a case in Virginia as well, which, if memory serves me correctly, that was relating to a homeowners association, and talk about a configuration of like businesses or people that just happen to be neighbors and are now working together in this environment. And we all have neighbors. I'm sure you have neighbors that would never share your driver's license, nor would I want to with many, right? So it kind of pits them in this interesting situation. There's a lot of opinions and dissent, and will it be changed? I would kind of be shocked if it wasn't extended, and I just say that coming from being in the tax business, because during COVID, as we recall, the tax deadlines were pushed forward. Um, Things were not quite normal, and everybody needed more time to deal with that. And I go back to what I was saying before about the lack of awareness. It doesn't feel right that an expectation with such gravity can be held over the heads of small business owners if they don't know. And how are they supposed to know? Like, what you're doing polling, so that's probably a great way to get a better sense. But I would think there should be some at least minimum threshold that should be met in terms of a percentage of people who do know about it in order to continue forward. Otherwise, the expectation to hold people accountable for those types of penalties just doesn't seem reasonable. So, I would not be surprised. Anybody knows what can happen the next couple of months. Well, we've got the election next week. So a lot of change happening. But I would not be surprised if it was extended or changed significantly.
It's similar. I keep thinking about the real ID requirements for identification and flying, and that. I mean, it's probably 10 years that went on. Where it was like, no, it's going to be next year. Everybody's going to have it, and then they, just kept kicking the can down the road. I think it's here now, but I haven't looked it up in a while. But it's interesting how the federal government comes up with these things that it deems, critical, but not so critical that they're willing to advertise and educate, and then ultimately the can just gets kicked. So let's hope, at least for our small business owners who are still unaware, that at least the deadline can get pushed. But speaking of things that may change with the next administration, I'm curious, just sort of in how the Tax Cuts and Job Act, obviously, your company sounds like was well on its way when the Tax Cuts and Job Act initially came to be. And we're looking at most, if not all, of the provisions sunsetting at the end of next year. What are you hearing from people about how that will impact either your clients, and then for you personally, if you're willing to talk about it, how do you see the Tax Cuts and Job Act sunsetting impacting your world?
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to have a great answer for you in regards to how that's all going to shake down. There's a lot of questions that are still kind of up in the air in that regard. I know that we do have to be nimble with the tax software. There's always last minute changes on the federal level, to say nothing about states. So, and a lot of those changes are typically coming in at the 11th hour. So there's always a scramble to adopt and to adjust to make sure that our ability to submit XML and the data via APIs is received in the way that it needs to be received, and make sure that the forms are proper. I don't think I can put too much color on that particular topic.
Jeff, if the Corporate Transparency Act, first, let me ask you about that lawsuit in Alabama, because it's kind of an odd lawsuit on what's happening, and it's just that group of people that are exempt, right? They're the only ones who are enjoying the stay. The rest of us are we're going to be compelled to file by 12/31. I personally, I'm not a lawyer, but I've done a lot of work in sort of the legal field on the PR side, and I've never seen a stay that isn't just, hitting everybody that the potential issue could affect, and just to hit that group is just so odd to me. I did read, though, after that, and we've been working a little bit with the small business committees, that there is some legislation to postpone it in front of the banking committee, but has not been taken up. Do you follow any of that, or is that getting too into the weeds?
I'm definitely not an attorney, and I'm certainly not a constitutional attorney. So I am certainly following it because we need to know if we need to adjust something with the services that we provide. But yeah, as far as that one group that initiated the lawsuit, their objective was certainly for more than just that one group. My non-attorney opinion is that it's more about attempting to set a precedent and to try and, demonstrate in a particular jurisdiction that you have belief that it indeed is non-constitutional. I know they tried to do that in Utah and I believe Oregon as well, with no success yet. As to why it was just that one group, other than the fact that was the plaintiff, I think that their real objective was, okay, if we can get a decision that this is non-constitutional for us, then it kind of begs the question that why would it just be unconstitutional for us, but it would follow suit. That's my read on it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, as it stands today, small businesses under 21 employees, under 5 million in revenue, have until December 31st to file this report with the government. And can you tell our listeners and our viewers, for those who watch us on video, where they can go to find out more about your organization who is helping people do that, or more information about how to do the filing?
Yeah, certainly. And one point of clarification in regards to the deadlines is that if you did create your business this year, you have 90 days within which to file that. And then starting January 1st of next year, 2025, you'll have 30 days within which to file it. So The group that's getting until the end of this year is the approximate 32 million businesses who were formed prior to the first of this year. But they're tightening up the reins on that as we go. And with regard to taking care of it, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of opinions about how you feel about it. And I kind of give the example of when I had a toothache, I didn't necessarily want to go to the dentist because it's not my favorite place to go. And they told me that I had to go to the endodontist and get a root canal. And I didn't want to do that either, but I'm glad that I did, because had I not, it would have been far worse. So that's kind of what I tell our clients who aren't enthusiastic about this. As far as where to go, I would definitely talk to your attorney or your CPA. That seems like the first choice. I hope that they're aware of it. But I'm also finding that there are a lot of attorneys, more so attorneys who weren't aware of it. You can go to FinCEN Direct. We have a couple different brands. FileDirect.net is really focused on BOR compliance. And that's a service where we allow very easy to use UI to get it done. But regardless of which route you take, I would absolutely encourage small business owners to understand this and to realize what you might be potentially subject to just for taking inaction.
Yeah, give you an expensive oversight and cost them not just money, but their freedom in the end.
Yes.
And probably in rarer cases, but still the fact that that's a penalty is quite scary. So Jeff,
we know the government's going to make an example out of somebody. I'm quite certain that it will happen. So somebody will, I just, we'll see how this shakes out, if it changes, how it changes, but I'm quite certain that there will be some penalties in there, and they will try and use someone to really make sure that the enforcement is real, because I think it is real. You just don't want to be that business person.
Right. Exactly. Well, Jeff, thanks so much for taking the time to join us on Main Street Matters today to discuss this important issue. And thank you all for taking the time to tune in and listen. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. Please subscribe to salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcast from. And we'll be back soon with another episode. Bye for now.